Chapter 39 Bad Intel. Commodore Tulani looked down at the papers on Admiral Ruel's desk. Then he looked up at the Admiral, an expression of incredulity on his face. 2.5 months? Tulani said. You found out where she was 2.5 months ago, and you're only just now scrambling the rescue mission? Are you serious? You're pulling my leg. The only intel we had to act on was the word of a damaged android and an intercepted FTL transmission, Admiral Ruel replied. And we only got that information because of the android. Selling this mission to the new president was the hardest thing I've ever done in my career, and I think I burned a couple of bridges to do it. But the mission is authorized, Tulani said. Both missions are authorized? Your top priority is to re-establish two-way diplomatic relations with the Savanti administration, Admiral Ruel said. If you can find Esperanta and her crew along the way, well, you're not authorized to deviate from the mission. But nobody is going to punish you if you do. Especially if you find Esperanta's crew. How many ships will I have? Tulani asked. 2 battleships, a silo ship, 6 cruisers, 12 destroyers, 8 frigates, and 9 corvettes, Admiral Ruel said. Oh, and these. The Admiral reached into his desk and produced 2 rank insignia patches. This one is for you, Ruel said, tossing a Rear Admiral patch at Tulani. There was supposed to be a ceremony, but we're in a rush, so it'll happen when you get back. And this one? Tulani asked, picking up the second patch. If that android was telling the truth, and Esperanta really kept her people alive through all that, then yes, I'll promote her straight to captain. Damn whatever Stratcom says. She's a lieutenant commander, Tulani chuckled. Skipping a rung on the ladder is small potatoes compared to the other stories that machine was spinning, said Admiral Ruel. Now go bring our people home. 38 Coalition warships undocked from Tiana Vex Starbase and moved out. Their destination? The nearby wormhole that linked Coalition space to Savanti territory. It had been just over 3 months since Axiom and Delegate faced off against the Sonamani escort fleet in battle. Both Kailasha and Ambika were nowhere to be seen, and Ino was cautiously optimistic that both starships had managed to escape and try to find help. Rylan and his people were not taking chances. They had started moving the colony underground, despite the fact that the enemy had not found them yet. It was a massive undertaking, yet nobody argued. Now it was just a question of surviving long enough for help to arrive. One cold morning, Ino emerged from one of the tunnel network entrances to find the source much quieter than it had been 3 months ago. It was the start of another 3-day surface shift for herself and many others, who had spent this time gathering materials and resources needed in the subterranean shelters. Ino passed by her chief medical officer, who was straining under the weight of a heavy-looking box. "What the hell is that?" Ino asked. "You need help?" "I've got this," Zapata replied. "It's just some chemical converters for the prophylactic fabricator." "Somewhat for the what?" Ino replied, stifling a giggle. "People are bored down there," Zapata said, narrowing his eyes at her. "And when they get bored, they make stupid decisions. And those stupid decisions make my life hell because human birth control and Savanti birth control are chemically incompatible and—" "I'm just busting your chops, Zapata. Carry on before you hurt yourself," Ino laughed, stepping aside for him. "Too late," Zapata grumbled as he descended the stairs and vanished into the tunnel network. Ino found Prisman on the roof of the administration building. He was peering through Ryland's digital telescope before tapping some notes onto his tablet computer. Any change? Same as yesterday, Prisbin reported. The enemy fleet is still loitering at the Savanti starbase. And their repairs? The enemy ships are almost fully repaired. Now they've moved on to the starbase. I'd say they'd have full control of it by now, and they're just getting the systems online. Ino looked up at the sky. In the daytime, the Savanti starbase was not visible, since it orbited the main star in the system. But Ino knew roughly where it was. Why don't they search for us? Ino asked. They've gotta know we're down here. I'm willing to bet they figured out we're hiding under a cloaking field, Prisbin said. They're probably trying to wait us out, to see when our power source fails. Or they called for reinforcements and are just waiting for the cavalry to arrive. Or maybe they did both, Ino suggested. If we didn't have a few hundred Destican prisoners, they probably would have glassed the moon by now. And if they figured out Araj isn't aboard Kailasha with Axiom, then they'll know for certain he's down here with us, Prisbin concluded, which makes a planetary invasion more likely than orbital bombardment. They're definitely waiting for support. All of the prisoners had been moved to one of the lower levels of the subterranean shelters. The warm-blooded reptilian marauders did not mind being in the warm confines, but the Desticans were clearly uncomfortable. All except one. Sota watched Araj Zilfalin lounging around his cell as though it were a palace. The enemy leader seemed not to have a care in the world. You seem confident. Sota spoke to Araj through the bars of his cage. I know my people have come for me, Araj replied. I see the fear in the eyes of your companions. I hear the whispered conversations down the hall. My brother's fleet keeps you trapped on this moon, and the only thing that saves you from the death you so deserve is my own presence. Eventually, the siege will end. When your people are starved for power, food, water, whatever comes first, you'll beg for my brother's mercy. And then he will look to me. Honestly, I thought I might just throw you to Elodie before we get to that point, Sota replied. Not all of my people are as merciful as Ino, you know. Araj narrowed his eyes at Sota. The mercy of humans counts for very little in the eyes of those who were chosen by the cosmos. Sota was about to respond when a commotion caught his attention. He secured Araj's cell, then stepped toward the front of the underground prison to see what was going on. A mob of people, both humans and Savanti, were crowding into the corridor, all moving in the direction of the nearest tunnel exit. Chief Medical Officer Zapata was trying to move the opposite direction and fighting against the crowd's movement. There's another fleet up there, a human yelled. Someone needs to check if it's one of ours, a Savanti added. Everyone going up at once defeats the point of an underground shelter, Zapata yelled in exasperation. Go back! Turn around! It took Sota almost 20 minutes to struggle his way past the crowd and up to the surface, where Savanti colonists and human survivors stood in awe on the city streets, looking up at an incredible sight. Even though it was the middle of the day, a flotilla of warships was plainly visible in the sky above. Silhouetted against the sun, it was impossible to tell whether these ships were friend or foe. Sota broke out of his stupor and ran to the administration building. Stumbling up the stairs in a rush, Sota briefly flashed his coalition ID card at the guards before making his way to the Savanti Military Command Center, just down the hall from Ryland's office. He found Ino, Prisbin, Ryland, Nagini, and several Savanti military officers gathered around one of the computer terminals. I thought we were cloaked, Sota said as he joined the group. How did those starships know to park right over our heads? Ino turned to face Sota, and he was stopped dead in his tracks by the wide smile she gave him. "They're ours!" Ino sounded like she was close to tears. "Sota, those are Coalition warships up there!" A voice came out of the computer terminal Prisbin was sitting at. "This is the Coalition battleship Betria transmitting in the Blind Guard. If you are receiving this transmission, you are currently considered unknown and presumed hostile. Transmit Coalition or Savanti recognition codes or countersigns using any electronic or visual means at your disposal. We will abort our fire mission at receipt of your countersign or recognition codes. 10 minutes to barrage." "Destican warships and the starbase are powering up their weapons," Prisbin called out, pointing to another computer terminal. "Transmit Coalition recognition codes, now!" Ino ordered. Prisbin tapped away at his keyboard frantically. "You guys are about to get a show. You should go to the roof." Ino, Sota, and several other marathon survivors scrambled to get out of the room and find a roof access stairway. Just as Ino reached it, she heard a voice from the command center. "We've got a countersign! Abort planetary bombardment! Retarget the starbase!" Sota and Ino reached the rooftop just in time to witness what came next. In high orbit above the sanctuary moon, the Volodymyr Zelensky-class battleship Betria veered away from the colony, turning its weapons against the starbase instead. On the bridge, Admiral Tulani could not help but smile as one of the tactical officers said, "Targets on planetary surface are friendly. Confidence 99%. "What about the starbase and those vessels around it?" Tulani asked. "Presumed hostile. High confidence." Tulani stood up from the captain's chair. "I don't want to see them anymore. Call up the silo ship." The Coalition warships began to deploy into a new formation. They formed a protective sphere with a single vessel at its center. The Coalition's silo ship powered up its massive radar array, target-locking the starbase and surrounding Destican fleet. Moments later, a ring of fire formed around its hull as hundreds of anti-ship missiles were launched. The barrage erupted like a stratovolcano, lighting up the scene as brightly as the sun. And then there were hundreds of anti-ship missiles flying through space toward the Destican fleet. The enemy fleet began to scatter, launching countermeasures as they went. The skies around the starbase were full of decoys, flares, and clouds of chaff. The battleship Sonomoni turned hard, aiming its nose toward the Coalition fleet and shielding its vulnerable engines and superstructure. Then missiles started to rain down on the Destican fleet like a hailstorm. Antimatter warheads detonated one after another, vaporizing anything that was too close. The barrage lasted for a few minutes, and when it was over, the Destican armada was a shell of its former self. "Report!" Admiral Tulani called out. "Enemy forces took a direct hit," said the tactical officer. "They're retreating. Sonomoni and her escorts are falling back to the hyperlane. Do we pursue?" "Negative," Tulani responded. "I want this moon secure and troops on the ground. Do we have two-way communication yet?" "Establishing now." A huge crowd of people gathered at the Savanti spaceport to welcome the arrival of Admiral Tulani's shuttle. Despite the scene being somewhat chaotic, Elodie was able to find the remaining UN Space Marines and organize an escort for Ino and Rylan. "Have you thought about what you're going to say?" Elodie asked. "Not really," Ino confessed. "I'm still in shock." "That someone came for us, or that your crazy plan actually worked?" Sota said. "Can I choose both?" Ino laughed. Savanti hovercraft rose up from the spaceport and escorted the first of many Coalition shuttlecraft to a smooth landing on the tarmac. Human soldiers poured down from the boarding ramps, carrying supply boxes full of food, water, and medicine. While the first distribution center was established, a single shuttle put down a little further away. Ino and her command crew started moving toward it. As she was pulled through the crowd by Elodie, an electronic transmission passed through Ino's cranial implant. "If you ever decide to come back, I will wait for you," said the message from Rylan. "I will come back. That's a promise," Ino replied. Ino, Elodie, Sota, Prisbin, Ndungane, Kazuki, Zapata, Hamilton, Mancini, and Oliver stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the Admiral's shuttle while the boarding ramp descended into place. Reza Agdashlu, Ashok Raval, and Hermione Durand directed the Marines to form a perimeter, keeping the civilians back. Admiral Tulani stepped off his shuttle and onto the spaceport tarmac. Ino saw him, and the two shared a smile. They had not seen one another since the Galax War Games 3 years ago. Admiral Tulani folded his arms. "So, this is awkward," he began. "I was under the impression that you were being held prisoner and needed a rescue. I suppose I had some bad intel." Ino looked down at her wrists, then raised an eyebrow at the Admiral. "No, your intel was just stale," she replied. "If you're still offering a rescue, though, we're interested." Admiral Tulani looked around. "So, Esperanta, you have a crew, but no ship. All of your military AI seem to be missing. The Admiral you started with is dead. Several of your crew appear to have ritualistic cybernetic implants. A random civilian android told me you're holding an enemy prince as a POW, and you're hiding under the most ramshackle cloaking device I've ever seen. Please tell me there's a story behind all this." Elodie and Sota looked at Ino with wide grins. "It's quite the story, sir. How much time do you have?" she said. Admiral Tulani shook his head, trying not to laugh. "I'd love to hear it, Esperanta. But first things first." He gestured to the small flotilla of shuttles coming in to land. "I think it's time for you and your crew to come home."
As you're on your way back home, something catch your eyes untold. Fear of darkness lingers here. You tremble as you get the